What I love about day 2 of the conference is everyone's so relaxed, everyone's so comfortable, we're all chatting, so it's like you don't even notice me coming on stage and saying good morning. And that's how it should be. But let's do it again. Good morning. And of course, one more time. No. Good morning. Fantastic, thank you. All right, so you know who I am. I'm Don Taylor. I'm the chairman of the conference. It's my job to welcome you. And again, thank you for making the commitment to be here for 2 days. It is a real commitment, and our job is to serve you, to make this a valuable learning experience for you as part of your continuing development. So, thank you. That's my first job. My second job is to get the housekeeping done. There's a small amount left, and we're going to introduce our special guests, the 30 under 30. Then I'll ask you a question. Then I'll introduce our keynote speaker. Then I will let him speak, all in a fabulous 10 to 15 minutes of headlong fun. So let's get the housekeeping done first. Books. I mentioned books yesterday, and I said we've got some great authors, and failed to actually tell you who they were. That was slightly embarrassing. I asked Kogan Page to tell me who the authors are who are on our program. We have books by Amy Brand, Stella Collins, Miriam Nealon, of course, Nigel Payne, Emma Webber, and Steve Wheeler downstairs on the Kogan Page stand. And there's 20% off each book. You can't buy the book from Donald Taylor because it's sold out, I'm afraid. It's sold out because there was one copy. It's gone to Conrado. He's taking it to Brazil, so thank you, Conrado. Learn Appeal, I mentioned yesterday, doing great work getting e-learning to people who have no access to the internet and sometimes not electricity, doing it in Africa and in the UK as well, whether it's for social reasons or for reasons of economics. So please go and support them, help them out, and they are on stand F17 downstairs. And of course, they are working with DOPSI, the diabetes charity, so worthwhile definitely going to see them. Always, of course, we have to talk about the 2 key things for a conference. In case you didn't get it yesterday, the Wi-Fi network is LT Conference, and the password LTConf, and of course our hashtag, #LT20UK. I will ask you a question in a minute, and I'm going to ask you to tweet your answers as well as to respond to the room. So if you're on Twitter, please make sure you're able to do that. All right, I think what I'd like to do now is introduce our special guests, the 30 under 30. If you could parade onto the stage, please, 30 under 30, that would be marvellous. And I'll just, while you're walking up, I'll explain to everybody what the situation is here. We've brought in this very successful program from the States. It was running for 10 years with Learning 2019 in the US. We decided to do it here. The idea is 30 people under the age of 30 who are coming into our industry. We give them a massively discounted ticket price for the conference and support them in other ways after the event itself. If you've ever done this, it's slightly creepy being on the stage and your peripheral vision, seeing a whole phalanx of people coming up and standing behind you. I'm not quite sure what they're doing, but from your faces, nothing creepy so far. I'm going to quickly tell you how they got to be here, and then I'm going to talk to 3 of them. As you can see, this has all been very carefully rehearsed. So how they got here, we invited respondents. So we said, look, if you're going to be under 30 at the beginning of the conference, please apply. We were inundated with applications. We had 7 judges judging. The judging was done completely blind. So we removed all mention of people's names, all mention of people's companies, so it wasn't possible to identify people. But if it was possible, we asked the judges not to participate. Each person was judged by at least 2 judges, blind, against 3 categories, and then we summed up the total judging award points, and then decided, right, there's our cut-off point. It was, therefore, a rigorous and really tough process. These people deserve to be here. Please just say welcome them with a round of applause. Now, who am I talking to? Oh, my goodness, as if by magic. All right. Okay, I'm just going to quickly ask 3 questions to 3 of them, a representative sample. Nikki, you've come here. You're reasonably new in the industry. Tell us very quickly how long you've been in the industry and what is it you're excited about L&D at the moment?
So I've been in the industry since 2014. I started my career at Johnson & Johnson, and now I'm at Western Union, so I had a really big industry change. What I'm really excited about actually was the talk that I went to with Bob Mosher yesterday. Right. It completely inspired me to change the way I think about learning. I've already contacted my director and told me that we're going to revolutionise the learning environment at Western Union. So watch this space and see how that goes.
Fantastic. All right, all power to the revolution. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Amy, I don't know why I did that. Amy, where have you come in from, and what's your experience been like so far at the event?
Yeah, so I am Amy Sinnott. I'm a learning project manager for Novartis, been in L&D for 5 years now. For me, I think when you say you work in L&D, I get, oh, you're a trainer. Okay, yeah. Not really. But so to be together with people, speaking a common language, and to have these conversations with my cohort, it's just been so amazing. Great. Learning from experiences.
Oh, with your family. Welcome to your family. Yes. Exactly. Okay, great. And Michael, all right, so we talked about the experience so far, where people are from. Tell us quickly where you're from, and what do you think the challenges are for us going forward?
Sure. So I'm Mike Osborne. I'm from a company called Profitability, and I've been in the industry straight from uni since 2012. Blimey. And for me, it's still about removing barriers, both removing barriers for us as developers. I think we've seen a lot of different tech out there, and how can we make, there's like big data, you need to learn marketing, and if you're a small boutique company, where do we start? Mm-hmm. And then there's also a case of breaking down the barriers for the learners as well. So how can we reduce the number of courses? How can we make the content more accessible? And how can we do gamification properly, not just points, badges, and leaderboards, as so many do?
Well, I tell you what, I'm pretty inspired by this bunch. That's a lot of really good answers to some complicated questions, and we can look forward to them revolutionising or being part of the future that we're all revolutionising in learning and development. They're now going to turn around and walk off the stage. Rather than giving them an embarrassing long walk off the stage, please give them a round of applause as they go off. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Very good. Very slick, very slick. All right, now I've got a question. I've got a question for you, everybody, which I'd like you to just think about. It's slightly different. I want you to imagine that you are, rather like the conversation we just had, you're giving advice to somebody who's the manager of a department for learning and development in a medium-sized organization. They come to you, they say, what do I need to do for the next 5 years? What do I need to do for the next 5 years? What one piece of advice would you give that person? All right? I'm going to ask you both to share it with us verbally shortly, and also to tweet it using #LT20UK in a second. All right, so please go ahead and discuss. We'll get some feedback, and then we'll get on to the keynote. What advice do you give to people running our industry? Go ahead. All right. See if this works. It's pathetic, isn't it? It worked earlier, I swear. Hey, that's great. Thank you very much. Look, we've already got some great answers for us on Twitter. Mel, let me just write Mel Millaway says, what advice would you give to people? Put the people first. That's a great answer. Nigel says, become indistinguishable from the business. Andrew Jacobs says, advice to a learning and development manager. I wouldn't give advice. I'd ask the manager what they thought the problems were, and I'd engineer support for them. All right, that's 3 great answers already. What else do we have? You're all cowed by the brilliance of those 3 answers. Okay, over there, quickly. You have to shout. Can you? No, you've got a big voice. Shout it out. In case you didn't hear that, he says, with 30 years of experience, I'd say, get out. Well, I have 30 plus years of experience, and I'd say, keep your enthusiasm and stay with us. But I take your point. All right, go on. Stop doing courses. Well, maybe. I'd say do your courses after you first ask Jeff Kortenbosch's 20 questions to ask before you do a course. Yes, all right, yes, go ahead. All right, don't be a shopkeeper and put your stuff on the shelf in case people need it. Listen to people, engineer it, and deliver it when they need the support, yeah? Okay, great. Anything? Yes, over here. It's not enough to develop the best training, you also need to market it. Oh, I like that. I'm going to repeat that. It's not enough to develop great training. You have to market it. If people don't know it's there, it's not going to happen, is it? Yeah, I love that. Great. Yes? It's all about the people. In fact, there's a great book by this bloke called Donald Taylor about implementing learning technologies, and the very last word of the book is people for that reason. You're exactly right. Yes, go on.
Close to the business and understand the needs and ask for help for your marketers.
Ah.
Great, and they can help you to do internal marketing.
Say it again about the marketers.
Get help from them.
Yeah. You don't have to be an expert in everything. In any organization, there are other people who are pretty good at stuff, maybe good at data, maybe good at marketing. Buy them lunch. The reward is often really, really high. That is really good advice. I'm loving this advice. We can't read it all. A lot of it is going to feed into our keynote in a second. But I would ask you, if you're on Twitter, okay, come on, one last one, quickly.
I think it's a good one. When you see a new piece of shiny learning tech, take a really cold shower, sleep
I love that. Come on, let's just repeat it. When you see that really hot piece of learning, shiny technology, just take a cold shower, go to bed, think about it, and see if you still feel the same way the next morning. I think that's great advice. Great advice, yes. It's always the people and the problem first, and the technology supports and comes last. Fantastic. Right, if you have got other stuff to share, please stick it on Twitter. And the world, because the world is watching learning technologies right now, the world will be inundated by great advice from this room, which is exactly what we want. Let's get back on stage. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. Sometimes you are lucky enough to go to an event and you hear somebody speak and you think, oh, right, that's it. I've got my keynote for learning technologies next year sorted out. And that's what happened when I heard Daniel speak. Daniel Hume is going to come on stage and talk to us about his work in artificial intelligence. He's from UCL, University College London, here in London, but he does other things as well. And he said, Donald, please don't worry about introducing me. Let me introduce myself, and I'm going to let him do that. But all I can say is I'm delighted, because my piece of advice that I would give to anybody in our industry right now is there's a lot of talk about data, there's a lot of talk about analytics, and there's a lot of talk about how artificial intelligence will change what we're doing. There are people already doing great work in this field, and he's one of them, and well worth listening to. Please welcome to the stage, Daniel Hume. Daniel.
Thank you. Okay, great. So a little bit about me. I do three things. So I run a master's program in UCL. I've got about 100 students every year that go out there and apply emerging technologies to solving lots of different business and social problems. So I have a very good sense about where organizations are at in terms of their digital transformation. And my entire academic background over the past 20 years is in artificial intelligence. I do the academic stuff for fun. I also lecture in the LSE on how to create purposeful businesses, which we'll talk more about later on. My day job is running a company called Satalia, which is about 120 people, and we build AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. And the third thing I do is I get to travel the world educating people like you, business leaders or future business leaders, trying to think about the impact of technology on society. Before we get into definitions of AI, I'm going to try and gauge how intelligent this audience is. I know it's early in the morning. Hopefully you've had some coffee. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. I hope that you try to answer them. Before we get into AI, I want to take you through this technology stack. And the first question I want to ask you all is, what is data? What is data? So at the bottom there, can anybody tell me what data is? 800 people, yes? Excellent, yeah. A lot of people will say it's information. It's not quite information. Data comes from the Latin word datum, which means given things. It's ones and zeros, it's bits and bytes, it's symbols, it's a fabric of our universe. It's not until you give it context does it become information. So if I say to you 210280, what is this? It's data. If I say that it's a date of birth or a sort code or how much money I have in my account, then it becomes information. So information is data in context. So let's get you warmed up. What does probably say? I know you can do this. What is it? Huh? ABC, good. And what does this probably say? 12, 13, good. You can see that the data that's going into your eyes is the same data, but you're giving it a different meaning based on its context. And I don't know how well this will translate, but if I tweeted right now, my laptop is sick, what does that mean? I'll do the arm, sick. What does that mean? It's brilliant, you're cool, I guess, or under 21. So that sound that's going into your ears right now can be interpreted in two ways. It could be very good or very bad, and it's really important that we know how to interpret it correctly. Okay, what does this say? John read the letter to Mary. It could be an instruction. John read the letter to Mary. I want you to picture in your mind the scene. John read the letter to Mary. John read the letter to Mary. Picture that image, that scene in your mind. What picture do you have in your head? John read the letter to Mary. I know you can do this, huh? John read the letter to Mary. Yes?
We've got two very different images.
Great.
One is somebody just reading a letter to somebody,
Yeah.
and the other is like an optician's. Like, what letter is that?
Oh, very good. Excellent. That's new. So a guy is reading a letter out loud to a lady, or they're reading the alphabet A, B, C, D to Mary. John could be reading the letter, a letter that was sent to Mary, addressed to Mary. John could be reading the letter of the law to Mary. John could be reading a book called The Letter to Mary. John could be reading a book called The Letter to a Lady Called Mary. John could be reading 2 words on a piece of paper, The Letter to a Lady Called Mary, or 4 words on a piece of paper, The Letter to Mary. This can be interpreted in many different ways, over 13 different ways, and we will all go away with a picture in our mind of what we think is correct, and we're probably wrong. And my goal today is to convince you all that humans are rubbish. That's my goal today. Okay. But one of the big challenges we have in computer science is taking this stuff, this light, this sound, this text, and trying to figure out what does it actually mean. And actually, we're getting quite good at this now. So imagine if I give you a spreadsheet, and in the spreadsheet, it has 3 columns. It has a column which is the date, a column which is the temperature, a column which is the number of ice creams. So date, temperature, ice cream sales. What do you do with that spreadsheet? What do you do with that information? What do you do with it? Huh? Get a campaign. Before you do that, you might try to look for some sort of correlation. Maybe you'll draw a graph. So if I have on my x-axis the increase in temperature, and y-axis I have got increasing ice cream sales, what does my graph look like? Wave your arms around. I know you can do this. Come on. Excellent. We see some sort of trend going upwards. The hotter it gets, the more ice creams we sell. This is called descriptive analytics. What we're doing is we're organizing information to try to know things about the world. That's what I would argue that knowledge is. We're organizing information, trying to find patterns. And we can do something really cool now. We can do a thing that everybody is excited about. It's called predictive analytics, and we can put a line through it. So now we have predictive power. If it's 22 degrees tomorrow, I can look at my model and I can see how many ice creams I need to manufacture. Even if I've never seen 22 degrees before in my data set, I can predict how many I need to manufacture. And I can take this model of the world and I can put it into a factory. And I can now have my factory manufacturing ice creams based on this knowledge. But can anybody tell me why we sell ice creams when it's hot outside? Why do we sell ice creams when it's hot outside? Huh? Okay, so let's take a step back. I'm inside. It's hot outside. What do we do usually in the UK? Huh? We go outside. Why? Scarce resource. 2 weeks of the year. Then what happens? We get hot. Then what happens? Buy an ice cream. What do we do with the ice cream? Put it down our pants. What do we do with the ice cream? Huh? Eat it. And why does eating an ice cream cool you down? Called thermodynamics. So to expect a computer to understand that narrative from this line is impossible. It doesn't understand that humans like to go outside, we like to get warm, we can cool ourselves down in lots of different ways, which is why it's really important you bring the people that have domain expertise together with the people that are really good at finding patterns in data. And it's really important that you learn how to bridge these 2 types of skills, because actually your domain expert is going to say, Daniel, your model of the world here is wrong. Because if tomorrow is scorching hot, your hottest day ever, what's my factory going to do according to my model? Huh? It's going to manufacture lots of ice creams. But what will really happen if tomorrow is scorching hot? You get a rainstorm. What will happen? No, people are not going to go outside because it's too hot, right? So the model of the world looks more like this. And what we're trying to do ultimately is understand the world perfectly so that we can make good decisions. Okay? Wisdom is the utilization of our understanding to make good decisions. In this case, we want to decide how many ice creams we need to manufacture. Turns out that humans are terrible at making decisions. Okay? I don't know if anybody's read the book Thinking Fast and Slow. Who's read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman? Good. Right, so Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and he argues that we have a fast brain and a slow brain. I'm going to try and get you to understand this now. So I'm going to ask you a few maths questions. I know it's early. And your job is to answer these maths questions as fast as possible. Use your fast brain. The faster you answer them, the more likely you are to beat your competitors. We're going to start out really easy, and we're going to get more and more complicated. So the first one is, what is 2 times 2? Excellent, we can do that. What is 14 times 763? Okay, so the first one is your slow brain, the fast brain. The second one is your slow brain. Okay, the combined price of a bat and a ball is £1.10. The bat is £1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Quickly? 10 pence? Everybody happy with that? If you said 5 pence, you knew the answer already, didn't you? You cheat. You did. It's not 10 pence. The bat is £1 and 5 pence. The ball is 5 pence. The combined price is £1 and 10 pence. The bat is £1 more than the ball. If you said 5 pence, you probably did cheat. But I can give you lots of these examples, and you'll get them wrong. Even these very simple examples, because you're using a fast brain, and your fast brain is often biased. Okay, imagine these are staff members, okay? And we know everything about these staff members. We know their skills, we know their preferences, and what we want to do is want to allocate these staff members to opportunities. Let's say, for example, flying staff members have got to the right of walking ones, and you're not allowed to have the same coloured staff members touching each other, and I don't know, tails like to be near tails. Can anybody tell me how many possible combinations there are of these 5 staff members? So ignore the rules right now. We're looking at one combination. I can flip 2 around, I get another combination, flip another 2 around, another combination. How many possible combinations are there of these 5 staff members?
120.
Good, excellent. Yeah, it's 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 5 factorial, the exclamation mark. 120 possible combinations. Some will satisfy the rules, some won't. One will be the best one. Okay, let's make the problem a bit more complicated. I've got 15 staff members now. Don't say 15 factorial. How many possible combinations are there? Huh? What does your fast brain say? A lot. That's also not the right answer. Huh? What does your fast brain say? All right, so there's over 1 trillion possible combinations. To expect a human to solve this problem, you're wasting your time. One rule to take away with you today, anything more than 7, don't use a human for, okay? So we're useless when it comes to anything more than 7, whether you're trying to figure out how to allocate people, route vehicles, spend marketing money across different channels. Anything more than 7, we are useless. And actually, industry don't have problems of this size. They have problems of this size. So here are 500 staff members. Can anybody tell me how many possible combinations there are? It's a big number. So it's a number that's got over 1,000 digits. And just to put this number into context, that's how many atoms there are in the universe. I work with big companies that have resourcing teams that are trying to solve this problem, right? They're trying to figure out how to allocate their staff. One of our clients is PwC. They have 5,000 auditors that they're trying to allocate to projects. 5,000 factorial. It's insane. Humans can't solve problems over 7. You can hire a good computer scientist. They'll probably solve problems up to about 50. Beyond that, you need to have deep, deep specialized expertise in solving these problems. Let's just drum this problem home. Imagine I've got my ice cream van, and my ice cream van has to deliver ice creams around these 24 points around London. Humans are actually quite good at solving these problems. So if we started here, maybe after a few minutes, we draw a nice path around these points that save the most amount of petrol. How long will it take a computer to solve that problem to get the shortest path? Seconds, milliseconds? All right, we've played this game already. It's actually 20 billion years. If you put 24 times 23 times 22 times 21, into your calculator, you get this number of routes. That's how many routes there are around those 24 points. And if you had a computer that could look at 1 million routes a second, that could check 1 million routes every single second, it would take 20 billion years to go through every single possible one and say, this one that I looked at 10 billion years ago, this one's the shortest one, you should do that. And if I had another point to the map, another customer, I've now got 25 times 20 billion years, 5,000 billion years. If I had another point to the map, I've got now 26 times 5,000 billion years. These are exponential problems, and they get ugly very quickly. And there are thousands of these types of problems that exist in industry, and we don't realize it, but humans are solving them badly, very, very badly. Okay. One of our clients is Tesco, and they have 100,000 points on a map we have to deliver to every single day, 100,000 factorial. All right, so when I build systems for companies, they usually have these 3 components. They have a data component, and everybody at the moment is going on their digital transformation. They're bringing all of their data together, which is great. Maybe in the Q&A, I can dispel some myths about data. But this is good. The next thing that everybody's starting to get very excited about is the middle part, which is using data science, machine learning, statistics to try to find patterns in data. Tableau, all of these tools to try and know things about the world. And I know companies that are hiring scores of data scientists and expecting those people to solve their problems. And I would argue, actually, companies don't have machine learning problems. They don't have data science problems. They have decision problems. Decision making is a completely different set of skills to statisticians, to machine learning experts. They matured in academia about 2 decades ago. They used to be called operations researchers. I don't know if you're old enough to know that term. But it's logic, it's optimization, it's discrete mathematics. Over the next 10 years, companies are going to realize that these people in the middle are really good at finding patterns from data, but they are not good at building systems that make decisions. And actually, I would argue that's where the real value is. So this top thing here, I would argue that there are only about 3,000 strong optimization experts around the globe. 3,000 people that can solve problems at scale, decision problems at scale. And I think that this skill is going to become more and more in demand over the next decade. But the challenge is how you bring all of these technologies together. So if you build a system that takes in data, goes through a model, makes a decision, and tomorrow you give it the same data, it makes the same decision, same data, same decision, what you have is automation. And automation is amazing because computers can find patterns in data better than human beings, and computers can make decisions typically better than human beings. But can anybody tell me the definition of stupidity? What is the definition of stupidity? Yeah, exactly. Doing the same thing over again, expecting a different answer. Automation, by definition, is stupid. And automation, by definition, is not AI. Okay, everybody that touches this technology stack at the moment is calling themselves an AI company, and that's fine because you get more money from clients and more VC funding, but this is not AI. There are two definitions of AI. The first one I think is popular but weak, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. Getting computers to do things that humans can do. And the reason why this is a popular definition is because humans are the most intelligent thing that we know in the universe. And when we start to get machines to do things that traditionally only human beings could do, like recognize you're male, you're female, you're happy, you're sad, that's a chair. When you start to get machines to correspond in natural language, like chatbots and things like that, we then assume that that's intelligence. We then assume because they're doing things that humans can do, it's intelligent. But I would argue that computers can find patterns in thousands of dimensions. Humans can find patterns in about 4 dimensions. If I throw a ball at you in 5 dimensions, you're not going to be able to catch that ball. And humans can solve problems up to about 7. Computers can solve problems with thousands of moving parts. So benchmarking machines against humans, for me, is a very, very silly thing to do. There's a better definition for me of AI that comes from the definition of intelligence. There's a really elegant definition for intelligence, and I did my master's on intelligence. It's this. It's goal-directed adaptive behavior. Goal-directed in the sense we're trying to achieve an objective. We're trying to sell as many ice creams as possible. We're trying to, maximize the utilization of our employees or maximize the training of our employees. Behavior is how quickly can we answer that question? How quickly can we allocate our resources to achieve that goal? But the key word for me in this definition is the word adaptive. So ultimately what you want to do is build systems that make decisions, learn about whether those decisions were good or bad, change its own understanding of the world so that tomorrow it can make a better decision. Build systems that self-learn. And I would argue I haven't seen a single successful complex adaptive system yet in production. So everybody that's claiming that they're doing AI, according to this definition, I would argue is not. So I'd argue next to 0 companies are actually doing AI. Because if you say to an IT director, I'm going to put a system in production that's going to behave differently today than it is tomorrow, they say, no way is that going into production. I need to be really careful about how my systems behave. And if you say, I'm going to put a system in production that needs to make mistakes for it to get better, they say, no way am I going to admit to putting systems in production that make mistakes, even though automation is making mistakes all of the time. Okay, so the number of barriers there. The other barrier is it's insanely complex to build these types of systems. It's hard enough just to do the middle bit, just to find patterns in data, never mind to make decisions and learn from those decisions. Does anybody remember the Microsoft Twitter bot that became sexist and racist very quickly? Microsoft launched a Twitter bot, lots of teenagers decided to tease it, and it became a Nazi bot very quickly. This is what happens when you put systems in production that adapt to the world. They can adapt in ways you can't predict. It's a really, really difficult problem to solve. It's 100 times more complex than just building automation. But for me, this is the true paradigm of AI, systems that are always continuously getting better, learning. Okay, so there are 2 flavors of AI. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's Socrates before he drinks hemlock and kills himself. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. So AI in the 60s and 70s was us writing down different rules and then trying to infer new knowledge from those rules. So if I say to you, Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, what can I infer from that? Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal, exactly. So the idea is we can write down all of these rules and try to infer new knowledge from those rules. And it didn't really scale, and it didn't really work. So there was an AI winter. And then in the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled on how biological systems learn. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD was trying to model the brain of a bumblebee. Bumblebees have 1 million neurons. You have 80 billion neurons. Bumblebees' brains can fit on the end of a needle, tiny brains. And bumblebees can do amazing things. They can navigate 3D worlds. They understand objects. They talk to each other. They solve problems. They don't handle windows very well, but ultimately, they are very, very smart creatures. And the question was, 15 years ago, can you take the brain of a bumblebee and actually implement that in a machine and have machines then navigating 3D worlds and solving problems? And it was impossible. And about 9 years ago, there was a new paradigm in this technology, now being referred to as deep learning or neural networks, that means that we can build brains that have hundreds of millions of neurons. So there's a step change in this technology that now allows us to build brains that we can teach to do things that traditionally only human beings could do. We can teach these brains to correspond in natural language, recognize you're male, you're female, you're happy, you're sad, that's a chair. We can teach these brains to do things better than human beings, pattern recognition better than human beings. And this is what people are calling AI, because these things are doing things better than human beings. But I would argue that these technologies are very good at finding patterns in data. They're really good at that, better than human beings. But these technologies are not good at making decisions. So what you want to do is you want to use these technologies to know things about the world, and then you want to use these technologies to then reason with that knowledge to be able to achieve an objective. You need to combine sub-symbolic AI with symbolic AI. Combine these, and build systems that then learn from their mistakes. It's an incredibly complex process. So please don't get seduced by words like deep learning, neural networks. These are very good at doing one thing, but I would argue that companies don't have pattern recognition problems. They have decision problems. So this is where it gets a bit weird. And if this is the bounds of human ability, this semicircle, I would argue we could probably take any specific task that a human does, and we could probably build a system that outperforms us at that specific task, significantly outperforms us. But it's very expensive to build individual systems that solve individual problems and getting them gluing together and working together. So there's lots of research at the moment going into what is called artificial general intelligence. So you are all GI. You are one system that can do many things, and that's what makes us special. So the question is, can we build a brain that can now do 50 things as opposed to one thing? And if you take this to its logical conclusion, it's predicted that within our lifetime, we are going to build a brain that is smarter than us in every single possible way. It is the last invention that humanity will create, and nobody knows if this is going to be the most glorious thing that happens to us or our biggest existential threat. Some scholars predict it's going to happen in the next 30 or 40 years. I think it's our biggest existential threat, and I'm trying to figure out how do we mitigate this risk. If you ask Elon Musk and these people, they will say, actually, this superintelligence, this what they call a singularity, has already happened. I'm going to digress a little bit. You might need a glass of wine for this, actually. But there's a concept called the Fermi paradox, which is if you look at the universe is very big and it's very old. It's 14 billion years old. And the mathematical likelihood of there being intelligent life in our universe is mathematically very high. There are gazillions of planets that can harbor life over billions of years. The mathematical likelihood of that intelligent life surviving to the point, like we will soon, hopefully, where we build a superintelligence is also mathematically very high. And if you build a brain that has infinite capacity to understand space, physics, time, all of this kind of stuff, then when we look into the night sky, we should see evidence, we should see patterns of life, of some sort of superintelligence, but we don't, and this is the paradox. And the theory, the hypothesis, is that we are living in a simulation created by a superintelligence in a different universe. There's a 1 in a billion chance that this is not a simulation. There's some really interesting experiments in quantum physics that suggest that this is actually a simulation that I won't bore you with, but if we've got time in Q&A, I can. So anyway, that keeps me awake at night. It's called simulation theory, and I highly recommend that you read about it. Before we build superintelligence, we're having to build systems that make decisions about our everyday lives. And I'm sure you've all heard this problem before. It's called the trolley problem. So I'm in my driverless car, and in front of me is a kid, and to the right are 2 adults, and to the left is a cliff. And the car can't stop. The kids run out. The car can't stop. Who does the car kill? So who would kill the kid? Put your hand up. Nobody. Who would kill the 2 adults? Put your hand up. A few people. Who would kill you? Few people, but we don't really agree, do we? And for 3,000 years, philosophers have been pontificating about these ideas, and we still can't agree as a species what the right answer is, even though we're having to now build systems that make these decisions, which is fascinating. First time in history we're having to actually really agree on what is the right ethical framework for humanity. And I heard that one day we'll have an ethical setting in a car where we want to kill grandmas over cats. And maybe even one day we'll have a brain scan or a personality that will create a scan that will create an avatar, a digital twin of ourselves, and that digital twin will make decisions on our behalf. So it will decide which one to kill. I actually heard an interesting extension to this where your avatar could be used to vote on policies, which means that we don't have to have politicians anymore, which I think is an awesome idea. And so if there's a burning building, and in the burning building there's a crying baby in a suitcase with £1 billion, and you can only save one, what do you save? Crying baby? How many babies can you save with £1 billion? Lots of babies. And so if I build, I'd save the baby as well, but if I build a machine, if I build a robot and say, robot, your objective, your goal is to maximize life expectancy. The robot's going to go and save the £1 billion because it knows it can invest that into curing malaria and all this kind of stuff. And you all know the answer to this, but if I said to you that I built a robot, I said, robot, your job is to eradicate cancer. That's your goal. What's the easiest way of eradicating cancer? Eradicating humans, exactly. So we have to be very careful about the objective that we give these systems and also the constraints that we give them as well. And this is an optimization problem. I see everything, unfortunately, as an optimization problem. And so this is a whole world of what is called explainable AI, explainable algorithms. So if we look at machine learning, when we build machine learning, so systems that allow us to find patterns in data, it's actually very difficult to know how it's finding those patterns. There's only a few companies in the world that know how to do that. And when it comes to decision making, actually, it's a lot easier to try to understand how systems are making their decisions. And at some point over the next 5-10 years, when we're making decisions about what training to give people or what projects to allocate them to, at some point somebody's going to say to me, explain how your algorithm has made that decision. And this is a very hard problem to solve. And again, I would argue there's only a handful of companies in the world. Not only that is that we have to build an ethical framework that we can measure these systems against. And maybe I'll talk about this later. But over the past few decades, I've been very interested in philosophy and psychology and economics and all this kind of stuff. And I think there are a handful of common themes that appear across lots of different ideologies, from humanism to Christianity to Taoism and Buddhism and Stoicism. There are these common pillars. And we're going to try in my company use AI to see if there are common pillars, common ethical pillars that we all agree on. And then maybe we can use that to then hold future AIs against. So we're going to try to use AI to create an ethical framework to hold future AIs against. So talk more about that later if you want. So, okay, I'm going to move on now. I'm going to talk about innovation. And I want you to just take a moment and look at this diagram. Just take a minute to read it. So this is a hierarchy. Hierarchies breed certain types of interesting relationships, and I'm sure you don't have any problems like this in your companies, by the way. Although it's not a picture of Satalia, although most people do sell drugs to each other. That's a very, very common thing in my company. And I would argue that hierarchies do not breed innovative organizations. They are not structured to enable organizations to adapt quickly to a changing world. Remember, adaptation is synonymous with intelligence. If you can adapt more quickly than your competitors, you are more intelligent. In fact, I would argue that over the next decade, this technology stack that I've just gone through will be a commodity. We already have access to super cheap compute. There's tons of data out there for you to get access to that's free. All of the tools that you need to build chatbots, to build million neuron brains, it's all free, it's all open source. You don't have to buy any of it. And at some point, somebody will commoditize optimization and somebody will commoditize self-learning. The big battleground for companies is not technology. The battleground is talent. How do you attract, retain, motivate, inspire talent to enable them to innovate so that your organization can adapt more quickly to a changing world? Steve Jobs had a really good definition for innovation. He said, innovation is creativity that ships. And for me, the most important word in that definition is the word that. That is taking ideas, generating ideas, and getting them to a point where somebody's willing to pay for them. That process is long and painful. The shorter we can make that process, the faster we can innovate, the faster we can adapt to a changing world. And to do that, you need to motivate your employees, and you need to upskill them. And there's a very good book, introductory book on motivation by Dan Pink. He said there are 3 things that motivate people: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is giving people the freedom to do whatever they want. And mastery is giving them the ability to become really good at what they want to do. And then purpose is giving them something higher to align themselves with. And he actually would argue now that there's a small p purpose. So the floor that you're sweeping or the bug that you're fixing or whatever, the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, how does that link to the bigger purpose? How do we connect those things together? I actually think there's another one, but we can talk about that later on. So your first challenge as a company is how do you attract talent in the first place? And I would argue that if you look at these two dimensions, how sexy is your brand or your industry, and how interesting or challenging are your problems? If you're not sexy and you don't have interesting problems, you're not going to attract talent. The number of CEOs that I know that are trying to hire data science teams, and they can't hire a single person because they're deficient in these two dimensions. Next is, if you're sexy and you've got lots of problems, lots of interesting problems, you'll attract talent and they'll most likely stay with you. But if you're in the other two quadrants, you'll most likely attract talent and they'll churn. They'll leave after a few years, and that can be more dangerous to your organization than not being able to attract talent at all. And I think it's really important to be honest with yourself on this diagram, because this will determine whether you try to build out your own team, buy tools, work with third-party vendors, all of that kind of stuff. So once you have attracted talent in one way or the other, then you have to try and create an ecosystem, a culture to enable that talent to thrive. And over the past decade, we've seen or 2 decades, we've seen a flattening of organizations. New technologies allow us to communicate better, remove middle managers. So we're seeing a flattening of organizations. But I would argue that this is still broken. This is not conducive for innovation. So I said that Satalia, my company, only has about 120 people. We don't have any managers. We don't have any fixed hierarchies. We have no KPIs. People are free to work where they want, how they want, on whatever they want. Nobody has had to tell anybody else what to do in the company in 10 years. And we organize ourselves like a swarm. It's a new type of paradigm for how organizations can be structured. And my goal is not just to scale this to 1,000 people or 10,000 people. My goal is to scale this to a planet. This might sound a bit crazy, but I want to try and create a planet where everybody is free to work on whatever they want, how they want, where they want, and be fairly remunerated for that contribution, to have complete control over their career development, the things that they want to work on. And it will challenge our concepts of what it means to be a company. It will challenge our concepts of what it means to be a country. But I think that this is potentially one solution to help solve some of the problems that we're going to be facing in humanity over the next 3 decades. So we talked a little bit about digital transformation, companies trying to get all of their data together. But what companies are really trying to do, ironically, is creating a simulation of themselves, a digital twin. They're putting sensors on all of their vehicles. They're putting on all of their assets. But most companies are made up of people. People are their assets. So we're seeing biometrics being rolled out across organizations so you can understand the well-being of people. We know that in the afternoon, after coffee, John, you're really grumpy. Or when those people work with Jane and they all get annoyed, etc. And we're trying to then use that data to try and make better decisions in our organizations. This is a digital twin of my company a few years ago, actually. So I can see, for example, if one of these two people leave, I get a silo between 2 parts of the company. I can identify secret lovers in my company. I can identify people who are going to leave the company before they even know they're going to leave the company. And so this is it raises lots of also very interesting ethical questions about who should have access to that information, who should have access to that knowledge. But ultimately, companies are trying to create this digital twin so that they can ask questions, run scenarios, and adapt the whole organization to a changing world. And creating digital twins is a 10, 15-year journey. And again, very few companies, I believe, are architecting themselves for this future world. So one interesting outcome of some of the things that we do in Satalia, so we ask everybody every year, changed a little bit now, but we ask everybody every year to make a public recommendation for their salary. They'll publicly declare what they want to be paid, and then everybody votes on whether those salaries should be reduced or increased or kept the same. And we use machine learning to determine how many votes one person has for another. So if I've worked very closely with you over the past year, if I'm very knowledgeable about your domain, if I'm knowledgeable about the company strategy, then I will have more votes for your salary than other people. So I had interns voting on my salary, and I had interns voting on other people's salaries that had a bigger weighting than me because were in a position to make a better decision than me. And one interesting outcome of this is it turns out that females tend to undervalue themselves. And so this is an example, I don't know if you can see this very well, but all of these dots here are people in the company. We have one blue dot here. So this is one of the females who'd made a recommendation for her salary. She had 429 votes to approve her salary, 36 votes to reduce her salary and 280 votes to increase her salary. So out of everybody in the company, she had the most votes to increase her salary. So she went away, she came back with a new number. She now has about 500 votes to approve, 0 votes to reduce, 210 votes to increase her salary. Still undervaluing herself. Go away and come back with a better answer. And so the question is, can you decentralize decision-making and can you empower people who are best placed to make those decisions? And the answer is you can. And you can use this not just for salary setting, you can use it for career development, for feedback, for resourcing. Decentralization, I think, is the future. And we are trying to create an ecosystem, a system, a platform that enables organizations to do this. We don't just adopt technology for the sake of technology. And we have organizational psychologists in our company. And I don't know if anybody recognizes this diagram and chart. But if anybody has therapists, maybe, you're not going to admit to that, or children, some of you may have come across a concept in psychology called attachment theory. I don't know if you've heard of it. I'd highly recommend everybody go and learn about attachment theory. So attachment theory is essentially about how your upbringing as an infant, before you're even conscious, affects your relationship style as an adult. So, for example, if your parents were very hot and cold with you, sometimes they gave you love, sometimes they didn't. Maybe they were going through a divorce, maybe they had another child, etc. What will most likely happen is you'll develop what is called an anxious or a preoccupied attachment style, which is you tend to get jealous very easily, you tend to depend on other people, all this kind of stuff. If your parents have been neglectful, they've left you to cry yourself to sleep, you haven't learned, you know that you can't depend on your caregivers, you'll develop what is called a dismissive and or avoidant attachment style, where you're typically very driven, very independent, you're not very empathic sometimes. I'm in this bottom corner, but I would argue that I'm quite empathic. But what's interesting is that 60% of the population have attachment disorders. 60%. So a dysfunctional at maintaining, building stable relationships. So in our current structures in work, these hierarchical structures, these power structures, of course you're going to have a whole host of mess if these people are terrible at forming, maintaining stable relationships. And so we're thinking very carefully about psychological concepts and making sure that people's dignity, their safety, all of this kind of stuff is protected at work. And so I think it's really important for you to be aware of that. We talk about the end of the world. So AI has probably been the most hyped technology that I've ever known. So it's bigger than big data, it's bigger than blockchain, it's bigger than open innovation and some of those things. And I think that there's going to be a bubble in this space because I think that people think that AI is going to solve all their problems, and I think that they think that it's finding patterns in data, but it's not. It's much more complicated than that. But I do think that AI is going to have the biggest impact on the world in ways that we cannot imagine. So it had the most hype, but I think it will also have the biggest impact. And lots of organizations, countries are investing heavily in this technology because they know the organizations that get there first are probably going to win. I don't know if anybody can recognize who made that quote at the top. The nation that leads in AI will be the rule of the world. Can anybody tell me who said that? Putin, yes, Vladimir Putin, exactly, to a group of students, I think, well, children. So I think we need to acknowledge, actually, that this technology is going to be incredibly disruptive, and it's going to be very, very hard for you to compete with organizations that do adopt them. But it's important also to adopt the right technologies and not get seduced by the hype. So I don't know if anybody has watched the series on Netflix, Black Mirror. I'd highly recommend that you do. Black Mirror is, each episode is different. And you don't have to watch the whole thing. And each episode is a dystopian near future where technology has really corrupted humanity in some way. And this particular episode is called Nosedive, which I really like. It's a world where we all have an app, and we're all rating each other on the app out of 5. So I'd be rating you for not answering your questions, and you'd be rating me for talking too quickly. And ultimately, you create this score. And that score, I said you're going to have a problem tweeting. This social score you carry around with you, and it unlocks faster internet, better hotel rooms, all of this kind of stuff. And the concern that I have is that the people that determine the algorithm, the people that say, if you do this, your score increases, if you do that, your score decreases, they're the people that rule the world. And we know that this is, I don't know if you know this, but this is rolling out across China. China are rolling out a social citizen score. There are people in China that are not allowed to leave China because they have a low score, and I think this is true. But you can download an app in China, and within a 500-meter radius, you can identify people that have a low score. And if you see them doing things that they shouldn't be doing, like spending money, etc., then you can report them to the authorities. And so this is really, for me, a potential dystopian future. And we think that it won't happen in the West, but I think that it will. I think that it'll be rolled out across our government. It's going to be rolled out across our organizations. And we need to be really careful. We need to hold the people accountable for making sure that this doesn't happen, our leadership accountable, etc. So this is a concern that I have. And it's exasperated by what I think is currently the objective function for humanity. So what is humanity's current objective function? Does anybody know? Yeah? Cool, you use the word produce there. Okay, what's the objective function of a country? How do we measure the success of a country? Growth, GDP. We're trying to maximize GDP. And how do we maximize GDP? By investing in infrastructure, trying to attract talent, enabling those talents to create innovations that we can sell to other countries, generate wealth, and increase our own GDP. And I think that technology is going to enable us to accelerate our ability to do this. I think that countries like like China, the US, who are embracing these technologies are going to just become better and better at it. And my concern is that it's a race to the bottom. My concern is that if we are just constantly trying to maximize wealth, we're going to create an unsustainable future for our planet. And so let me just use an example. I'm sorry to point fingers at Facebook. They're an easy target right now. But what's Facebook's primary objective? What's their primary goal? Make money. Just make money. And they make money by keeping you looking at that screen. They have an army of PhDs to keep you looking at the screen. The longer you look at the screen, the more money they make. And if Mark can't provide his 5% returns to his shareholders every quarter through innovation, through new ideas, all this kind of stuff, then what tends to happen is that companies make bad decisions. They avoid tax. They compromise their employees. They compromise their users. They compromise the environment. They compromise other species. And this is not sustainable. In fact, the idea of shareholder returns has only been around since the past 40 years, and we need to rethink this. We need to rethink and avoid this pressure to constantly provide 5% growth. It's not sustainable for our planet. And I think actually the future is replacing these types of companies with what are called decentralized organizations. So imagine for a moment we could create a platform that allows anybody from anywhere in the world, China, Africa, wherever, to be able to boot up an idea, let's say an open source version of Facebook. And everybody around the world who wants to can then contribute to that idea, whether you're a developer, a designer, a leader, a HR expert, or whatever. You can contribute to that idea, and your contribution is remunerated fairly. So you can essentially bring all of the resources together that you need to drive forwards a product or a service without having to have a centralized company. And if you could create an economic model that could feed that community, and Facebook have, I think, 2 billion users. If every single user in your open source platform paid £1 per year, £2 billion of revenues to support a community of 20,000 people whose passion is to connect people as opposed to keeping you looking at the screen. And if it becomes weaponized, then it can be turned off without worrying about annoying a load of shareholders. So I actually think that if somebody can build this platform that enables people to boot up those ideas, to enable people to resource them, and I think that we could actually see companies like Facebook, Uber, Airbnb actually start to disappear and replaced by open source versions. And actually, I would argue that if you're a company and you're sitting on an innovation right now, the thing that you might want to do is actually also decentralize it, because that will then give you access to the community, it'll give access to data, because if you don't, one of your competitors will. And I think that the real sustainable value is in accessing the data and accessing the community. So I think that we're going to see companies decentralizing themselves, which is going to be a very interesting few decades. Okay, so there are 3 things I'm concerned about, but I'm also hopeful. I wouldn't be standing on the stage if I wasn't hopeful. So this was a study that was done in, I think it was in Davos, a few years ago, which is one of the biggest threats to your business. The biggest threats were environmental threats. And this isn't my domain, but we do have, over the next decade, some environmental challenges to deal with. The 2 other things that I'm particularly interested in, one is called the economic singularity. Economic singularity is where, at the moment, technology is being used to free people from their tasks so that they can go and do more interesting things. But at some point, this pressure to get more value out of our organizations means that people will be freed up from whole jobs. Humans are expensive. It makes much more sense to remove their jobs. And the concern is if you free people from their jobs, and if they can't retrain fast enough to get new jobs because AIs have taken them, then we're going to see a lot of job losses and potentially a lot of social unrest. And it's predicted in the next 15 years that this could happen. And I sit on a number of think tanks trying to address this. I think the decentralization, being able to also rapidly learn, rapidly upskill, is going to take the edge off this. The second thing I'm concerned about, the third thing I'm concerned about is what is called the technological singularity, which is where we build a system smarter than us in every single possible way. And it's predicted to happen around 2040, 2050. It will be the last invention that we create. And I would argue that if we do not start cooperating as a species, if we stop fighting over GDP and stop fighting over resources, if this thing comes along and it sees us as a threat, it will probably remove us from the equation. And I actually think the answer is not going to come from governments. It's actually going to come from you. It's going to come from corporates. So to survive, are going to have to not just be profitable, but you're going to have an incredibly strong purpose. Because having a strong purpose means you'll attract talent, you'll attract customers. So I'm actually really hopeful that the private sector is going to solve many of these problems. The purpose of Satalia is enable everybody to be free to live beyond themselves. Create a world where everybody has their needs met, their nutrition, their healthcare, their education, so that they're free to live for other people. That's our goal over the next 30 years. And I'd strongly advise all companies to have also an incredibly strong purpose. So on that note, I will stop. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to grab a coffee. Open up for questions. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, go on. I have heard Daniel speak before, and you'll have seen me sitting in the chair doing this, and I look like I'm thinking. I'm actually watching the monitor so I can see the slides here, but I am actually thinking, because I've heard this before, much of it. We've conversed about what Daniel's going to speak about, but still, there's so much to think about in this, so much. We're here for learning and development. We are, and by the way, I'll have my Twitter pad up in a second, so please get some questions up. But the key question for me is, what part do we play in, because people in this room play a leading role in organizations in helping people learn.
Yep.
Maybe training, maybe providing systems and support. They help them learn. What part will what you've been talking about play in making that more effective in the future? Is the human role going to become redundant?
So
you didn't nod there, did you?
I don't think we'll become redundant, at least in the short term. In the long term, it might, but we'll see. So maybe just to give you an insight, one of the exercises that we've done is try to understand what are the qualities that might exist across all of these different ideologies and like all of these different philosophical ideologies. And the 4 qualities that we think that we have identified, and these might sound obvious to you, are first developing a broad set of skills or wisdom. So on the Temple of Delphi, it says, know thyself.
It says what?
Know thyself.
Know thyself.
And so how do you enable people to develop a broad set of understanding about what it means to be human, about economics and politics and psychology? So essentially develop wisdom. The second is how do you enable people to develop a deep set of skills so that they can create? You could argue that if you don't have a depth in being able to in a particular skill, you can't do anything new. So it's like the T-shaped individual that we all know. So the first 2 are the qualities about the individual, breadth and depth. How do you enable those people to develop both of those? The second 2 are around how we interact with others. And again, this is going to sound obvious, but the first one probably best from the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm, or don't do to other people that you wouldn't do to yourself. So how can you create people that are wise enough and systems and structures that enable people to not do harm? To care for other people. So don't do things that are bad. And the fourth is do good. So how do you enable people to live for others, to educate others, to create things that make other people be able to develop themselves broadly and narrowly. So those are the 4 qualities that we look for in Satalia. And I think that an AI is not going to help people understand where they are currently now, what things they can be doing in the projects that they're working with, the teams that they're working on, the courses that they could be doing to help develop themselves in those 4 ways. I still think it's a very complex problem that an AI can't quite solve. It can probably aid, but it's still going to require the human to understand how to curate that profile.
One thing that's come up again and again, I know in talks we've had here this year and in the past, is the importance of context. And you can have all the data in the world, but as you say, without the context, without the ability to interpret it and put into, make sense of it, when you put it into action, it's pointless. So there must be a role for the human being here. We've got a couple of questions, one from David Swaddle saying, should we just give up and give all our money to Jeff Bezos? I don't think we have to do that just yet. We had a question here from Amy saying, what role can learning development play in contact centres? So very specific, but actually, contact centres are a really interesting example because they have loads of really specific data. So in a contact centre, with the increasing use of chatbots and virtual assistants.
Yeah, so that's an obvious place to have the AI replace human beings, and I know organizations are investing in that. So these technologies can profile people, so I can profile an agent, I can profile the shape of the problem or question that's coming in, and I can use these technologies to better match them. But I can also say that this agent wants to develop themselves in these X different skills, the AI can then match them to things that also enable them to develop their skills as well. So these technologies can enable those agents to develop, but I am concerned that actually that's a really obvious area to replace the human being, and natural language processing chatbots are going to become infinitely more intelligent over the coming years.
Is it like a microcosm for work generally, where there will be procedural work which will be automated, high-level tasks, if you like, third-level support calls, will be still subject to the human domain because that's where the problem solving comes in?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also companies need to acknowledge that perhaps the people that engage with the customer are the most important people in the company. And if you're replacing people with a bot, then maybe that's actually the wrong decision because you want to have that human element there, and actually that could be a very positive sell.
It might be, it might not be. If you're satisfied, so that you just want the thing done.
Indeed.
And I want to know how I turn my computer off. I don't want to have to be asked to have a nice day.
Yeah.
So I think if you take the example of the contact center and then look at the world of work generally and how we are helping people learn in the world of work, does the same thing apply? Do we have the same, because contact centers, people are dealing with specific problems, we get very precise details. How long did it take? What words were used? Was the person satisfied or not? How many calls did it take to solve the problem? All that information is stored in systems now.
Yep.
We don't have that typically in work at the moment. Do you think we will do, and do you think that will be an incentive for optimizing?
Yeah, so the way that companies are starting to think about creating their digital twins are collecting two types of data. One is called passive data, so emails, Slack, Hangouts, all of this kind of stuff that you can start to collect. And actually, one of the biggest challenges is pulling all of that data together. The second is active data, so doing questionnaires and things like that. But by combining all of this data, what you can start to do is you can start to profile people. You can start to understand their relationships with each other, their relationships with decisions. You can start to understand, so who they are. And then we need to then say, where do you want to be? And then create that journey for them. Right. So I think that there's lots and lots of data that sits within organizations. The challenge is how you pull it together. From the very beginning, Satalia architected itself very, very carefully so that we can now collect data across all of our different platforms and link it all together. But companies are going to have to go on that journey to actually be able to do this.
You're on a greenfield site in terms of building on technology.
That's
Most
right.
companies aren't. They have to deal with the legacy systems.
That's
so
right.
It'll be difficult for them. A quick shout out to Ned Young. My summary review of the Solve Engine, which is Daniel's Twitter handle, the Solve Engine's keynote talk, emoticon of exploding head, need a cup of tea now. I think we all feel the same way, Ned. But Kat says, I really like the ethos, do no harm, do good. Great words to live by, and I agree. I think it's very important. People do talk about the theatre of ethics associated with this, but these are big issues where if you get something wrong, it can have a multiplying exponential effect on a lot of people. So it is right to set off, I think, with an explicit ethical approach. Do you want to talk more about that?
And just very quickly, you then building an organizational structure that you can adapt, because you're going to get it wrong, you're going to have biases, you're going to have problems, but then how quickly can you react and adapt to that? That's critical.
I did want to know also, the diagram you put up of the organizational structure, I have worked there, and I was wondering how you got all that information.
Which was the organization, that company.
Who was sleeping with who, and so on. All right, so here's a question about the bias and the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that we have and assume that we make decisions that we are not competent to make because we believe that we are good enough to make them. So let's assume we have great data. Let's assume we have ways of collecting it, giving us not the wisdom, but giving us at least the information to analyze. Is there a risk that, because over here we have a lot of data about activity, we make decisions based on what we think people should do. There are other things, behaviors, attitudes, thoughts about, people have questions of identity of themselves, which we have no data on, but which nonetheless are terribly important to people. Is there a risk that we are too data-driven, we ignore that, we have bad results for the organisation and the individuals?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest challenges, by empowering people to make decisions, you could end up having a situation where they don't know what they don't know and have all these different biases. And this is where I think it's incredibly important to develop actually good leadership, good management, and not in the sense of telling people what to do, but how can you make sure that they are asking the right questions for themselves, how they make sure that they're getting the right information, that the decisions that they're making are not impacting other parts of the organisation. And so I'm not at all advocating not having leaders, not having management type roles. It's just that they become facilitators for better decisions, helping people what they don't know, they don't know.
And I think this does apply to us in L&D, and I think I see a lot of people doing interesting stuff, but actually not necessarily using the tools, in particular chatbots, as effectively as they could be used, because they're not necessarily aware of the implications of using that chatbot with people. And the great example is there are a lot of, I would say, coaching tools which have insufficient credible intellectual property behind them and give people advice which might be ill-founded, not maliciously, but just because they don't know what they don't know when they set it up. Yep. Daniel, I'm about to wrap up, but I think the last word should go to you. Is there anything you want to say to the audience? I'm just asking you to summarize 20 years of research and thinking in AI into a few words for people to take away into their tea break.
It's going to be all right.
Oh, thank God. Brilliant.